During my wedding, my wife's family humiliated my mother in front of 204 people. Then said to one of the guests, "That's no mother. That's a mistake wearing a dress." My bride TOB laughed. I did not. I stood up and cancelled the wedding in front of everyone. Then I did this. The next day, their world fell apart because my wedding day wasn't supposed to end in public humiliation and a shocking annulment. It began like a dream, but 3 hours later, everything I thought I wanted shattered, exposing a truth I desperately tried to ignore. I'd always believed weddings were sacred, a beautiful merging of two families, two histories. My mother, Susan, used to tell me stories about her own, about my father's tears, her mother sewing her dress. These stories shaped my deepest beliefs about marriage. But what actually happened on June 14th, at the Astor Grand Hotel, in front of 204 guests and a very expensive string quartet, that shattered everything? I met Isabel Montgomery during my second year of law school. She was wrapping up her MBA, incredibly ambitious, with a sharp wit that I initially found exhilarating. Her confidence skirted the edge of arrogance, but I convinced myself it was just bold self-assurance. Love, I learned, has a way of blurring those critical warning signs. Our first date was at a trendy wine bar near campus, all exposed brick and pretentious menu descriptions. She ordered for both of us without asking my preference, and I found it charming, not controlling. She spoke about revolutionizing sustainable investing, about the family business she'd inherit, about summers spent at their vacation home in Nantucket. I, on the other hand, talked about my two-bedroom apartment childhood, my mother Susan working nights so she could make it to my school plays, the scholarship that made law school even possible. Isabel listened, or at least I thought she listened, with what was probably more anthropological curiosity than genuine interest. It must have been so character-building, she'd said, swirling her wine, growing up without advantages. It really gives people a certain resilience. I should have heard the condescension dripping from that compliment. But I was so desperate for her approval, I heard validation instead. Our relationship progressed quickly. Isabel was magnetic, a master at working a room, making powerful people feel important while subtly positioning herself as their equal. I admired her strategic mind, her refusal to apologize for her ambition. Coming from a background where wanting too much felt ungrateful, her unapologetic hunger felt liberating. She met my mother 6 months in. I prepped them both extensively, coaching Susan on Isabel's interests, briefing Isabel on my mother's sensitivity about her lack of formal education. Dinner was at a mid-range Italian place, neutral ground I hoped would put everyone at ease. Susan arrived first, wearing her best blouse and the pearl earrings my father had given her for their 10th anniversary. She'd clearly spent hours getting ready, and my heart ached with her nervous excitement. Isabel breezed in 20 minutes late, offering no apology. She air-kissed Susan's cheek, then immediately began examining the menu with visible disappointment. "Nathan, honey, next time, let me pick the restaurant. I know a wonderful farm-to-table place that just got a write-up in the Times." My mother's smile flickered. "This place has lovely lasagna. Nathan used to love it in high school." Isabel barely glanced up from the menu. "Oh, I'm sure it's fine for what it is," she dismissed. The conversation limped along. Every topic Susan raised, Isabel redirected towards something she found more interesting. When my mother mentioned her nursing work, Isabel launched into a story about a spa retreat she'd taken with an amazing holistic health practitioner. When Susan asked about Isabel's family, Isabel delivered a 15-minute monologue about the Montgomery legacy that left no room for reciprocal questions. Driving my mother home afterward, she was quiet for a long time. "She seems very accomplished," Susan finally said. "She is. I know she can be intense, but once you get to know her." "Nathan," my mother's voice was gentle, but firm, "does she make you happy?" I didn't answer immediately. Which, looking back, was probably answer enough. "I just want you to be with someone who sees you, truly sees you. Not what you might become or what you can offer, but who you are right now." She patted my hand. "But you're a grown man. You'll make your own choices." I convinced myself she was just being overprotective, that her concerns stemmed from insecurity about meeting someone from a different world. The alternative was admitting I'd ignored every warning sign because I was afraid of being alone, afraid of not measuring up, afraid that Isabel was the best I could hope for. Her family came from old money. The Montgomerys had made their fortune in commercial real estate 3 generations back, and they carried themselves with a particular brand of superiority that comes from never having worried about a bill. Isabel's mother, Victoria, collected charitable board positions the way some people collect stamps. Her father, Richard, spoke about everyone outside their social circle as if discussing an inconvenient species of insect. My mother, Susan, raised me alone after my father passed when I was 7. She worked double shifts as a nurse for 23 years, often coming home with her feet so swollen she could barely walk. She sacrificed vacations, new clothes, any semblance of a social life, to put me through school. Every Christmas, she'd apologize for not being able to afford more. And every Christmas, I'd tell her she'd already given me everything. When I proposed to Isabel, I did so with my grandmother's ring, a modest diamond my grandfather had saved for 18 months to purchase in 1962. Isabel accepted, though she mentioned casually that we could upgrade it later. My mother said nothing when I told her, but I noticed her jaw tighten. The wedding planning revealed fissures I had been willfully ignoring. Victoria insisted on handling everything, claiming my mother wouldn't understand how these things are done. The venue cost more than my mother's house. The flowers alone exceeded her annual vacation budget, not that she ever took vacations. Susan tried to participate in small ways. She offered to address invitations in her careful handwriting, a skill she'd developed over years of writing patient notes. Victoria declined, explaining they had already contracted a professional calligrapher. My mother suggested baking her famous lemon squares for the dessert table, a recipe passed down from her grandmother. Victoria's laughter was brief and dismissive. "That's sweet, Susan, but we're having a Viennese hour catered by Pierre Dubois. Perhaps you've heard of him? He did the Garrett wedding last spring." My mother had not heard of Pierre Dubois. She had not been to the Garrett wedding. She retreated from offering help after that. And I told myself it was for the best, that she would only be overwhelmed by the scope of Montgomery expectations. The engagement party was held at the family's country club, a place with membership fees that exceeded my annual rent. My mother attended in a dress she'd borrowed from her friend Clara, a former coworker who wore roughly the same size. She looked lovely, dignified, appropriate. None of it mattered. Victoria introduced her to a group of society women with the phrase, "This is Nathan's mother. She's a nurse. Isn't that noble?" The way she emphasized noble made it sound like an affliction. The women smiled politely and excused themselves within minutes. I found my mother later, standing alone by a window overlooking the golf course. Her champagne glass was still full. "You okay?" "Fine, sweetheart. Just taking in the view." She gestured toward the manicured green stretching toward a distant tree line. "It's beautiful here, like something from a movie. You don't have to stay if you're uncomfortable." She turned to face me and I saw something in her expression that I hadn't noticed before, resignation, maybe, or acceptance of a situation she knew she couldn't change. "Nathan," she said, her voice soft but resolute, "I would stand in a room full of strangers who looked down on me every day for the rest of my life if it meant seeing you happy. That's what mothers do." She touched my cheek. "Now, go find your fiancé." "I'm perfectly fine." I believed her, not because it was true, but because I desperately needed it to be. The tension escalated in smaller moments over the following months. Isabel made comments about my mother's quaint house, her practical car, her simple taste in restaurants. She suggested more than once that perhaps Susan would be more comfortable with limited involvement in wedding events. "It's not about excluding her," Isabel explained during one argument. "It's about protecting her. She clearly doesn't feel at ease around my family's friends. Wouldn't it be kinder to spare her the discomfort? Or your family could try being welcoming," I shot back. Isabel's expression hardened. We are welcoming. We're welcoming her into our world, Nathan. A world she didn't earn and doesn't understand. The least she could do is show some gratitude instead of making everyone feel guilty for having standards. The words hung between us. I should have walked away then. I should have recognized that someone who viewed my mother as an interloper to be tolerated, rather than family to be embraced, would never be the partner I needed. Instead, I apologized for raising my voice. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Montgomery Estate, a sprawling property in Santa Barbara with gardens that employed 3 full-time staff. My mother wore a blue dress she had saved 4 months to afford, something she found at a department store sale that she thought made her look refined. She'd asked my opinion nervously before buying it, and I told her she looked beautiful. Victoria greeted her at the door with a smile that never reached her eyes. Susan, how festive is that polyester blend? How practical. My mother's smile faltered for just a moment. It's actually quite comfortable for traveling. I'm sure comfort is important when you're used to simpler accommodations. Victoria turned away before my mother could respond, her attention already fixed on more important guests. Throughout the evening, I watched the Montgomerys and their circle navigate around my mother like she was a piece of furniture slightly out of place. When she tried to join a conversation about travel, Chloe mentioned their recent trip to the French Riviera, then asked my mother if she'd ever been to Europe. When Susan said she hadn't had the opportunity, the group exchanged glances that communicated volumes. Richard cornered me near the bar later that night. Nathan, your mother seems like a hard worker, salt-of-the-earth type, but you understand. At the reception tomorrow, it might be best if she stayed toward the back during the mingling. The Harrington family will be there. And you know how particular Margaret can be about her dinner companions. I should have thrown my drink in his face. Instead, I nodded, a knot of self-loathing tightening in my gut. The morning of the wedding, my mother called me while I was getting ready. Her voice trembled in ways I had rarely heard. Nathan, I just want you to know how proud I am of you. Your father would have been so proud. I know I don't fit in with Isabel's family, but I promise I'll stay out of the way. I won't embarrass you. My heart broke a little. Mom, you could never embarrass me. I just want your day to be perfect, sweetheart. That's all I've ever wanted. Just your happiness. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The hotel ballroom had been transformed into something from a magazine spread, thousands of white roses cascading from every surface, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across Italian marble floors. 204 guests filled the chairs, a sea of designer gowns and bespoke suits. I stood at the altar watching Isabel walk toward me. Her dress probably cost more than my mother's car. She was beautiful, objectively stunning, and I waited to feel the rush of emotion I had read about, the overwhelming certainty that the rest of my life was beginning. Instead, I felt something closer to dread. The ceremony proceeded according to plan. Vows were exchanged, rings presented, the officiant pronounced us married. As we walked back down the aisle to applause, I caught my mother's eye. She was crying, clutching a tissue, her face radiant with joy that I had given her this moment. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had almost called the whole thing off that morning. Standing in my hotel room, adjusting my tie for the 15th time, I had felt a weight settling on my chest that had nothing to do with wedding nerves. My best man, Daniel, noticed something was wrong. You look like you're about to face a firing squad instead of a bride. Just nervous. Daniel had known me since freshman year of college. He could read me better than most. If you're having doubts, real doubts, this is the time to say something. Not after. I thought about my mother downstairs, probably already dabbing at tears of joy. I thought about the deposits, the guests, the carefully orchestrated day that had been months in the making. I thought about what people would say, how Isabel would react, how the Montgomerys would frame my cold feet as confirmation of everything they believed about people from my background. It's fine, I told Daniel. Just wedding jitters. Everyone gets them. He didn't believe me, but he let it go because that's what friends do when they sense you've already made your choice. Walking down the aisle with Isabel on my arm, smiling for photographs while my stomach turned with unease, I told myself I was doing the right thing. Marriage was about commitment, about pushing through difficult moments, about choosing someone. Even when choosing felt hard. My parents had faced challenges, too. Every marriage did. But my parents had faced challenges together, as partners united against external obstacles. They hadn't faced a fundamental divide in how they saw human worth. The reception began smoothly enough. Cocktail hour, photographs, the first dance. Isabel moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations like a queen receiving tribute. I found my mother sitting at table 12 near the back, as Richard had suggested, sharing bread rolls with my cousin Michael, who had flown in from Denver. Having a good time? I asked, squeezing her shoulder. The best time, sweetheart. Everything is so beautiful. She gestured around the room with a wonder that seemed almost childlike. I've never seen anything like this. You look beautiful, too, Mom. She blushed and swatted my arm. Go on, get back to your bride. Don't worry about me. The speeches began around 8. Richard gave a toast that mentioned the Montgomery family history for 7 minutes before acknowledging Isabel for 30 seconds. Victoria spoke about her daughter's accomplishments, her prestigious education, the bright future ahead. Neither mentioned me except as an accessory to Isabel's life story. Then Chloe took the microphone. I want to talk about family, she began, swirling her champagne. About what it means to be a Montgomery. We come from a legacy of excellence, of standards, of knowing exactly who we are and where we belong. I felt the atmosphere shift before I understood why. Chloe's gaze swept the room, lingering on table 12. Of course, marriage means welcoming new family, even when that family is. She paused, and several people laughed at an inside joke I wasn't privy to. Well, let's just say not everyone is born to certain stations in life. My mother's face had gone pale. She was gripping her napkin so tightly her knuckles had whitened. But we'll do our best to make Susan feel included. Chloe's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Even if she seems more comfortable in the break room than the ballroom. A ripple of laughter moved through the Montgomery side of the room. I stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Actually, Chloe continued, emboldened by her audience, I was just saying to Aunt Beatrice earlier, when I saw Susan walk in, she gestured theatrically, that's not a mother. That's a mistake in address. The laughter this time was louder, more confident. I watched Victoria cover her mouth, shoulders shaking with amusement. Richard nodded along, smirking. And Isabel, my wife of 3 hours, threw her head back and laughed. She laughed. Something fundamental shattered inside me. My mother had started to rise from her chair, her face crumpled with humiliation and confusion. Michael was trying to help her, but she was shaking too hard to stand properly. The sound of my chair scraping back cut through the laughter like a knife. 204 faces turned toward me as I walked to the microphone, gently removing it from Chloe's surprised grip. I'd like to say something. The room fell silent. Isabel was still smiling, assuming I was about to make some diplomatic gesture to smooth things over. She had never understood that there were lines I would not allow to be crossed. That woman you just mocked, I said, my voice steady in ways I didn't feel, worked 16-hour shifts so I could eat. She slept in a chair beside my bed for 2 weeks when I had pneumonia at 8 years old. She wore the same winter coat for 11 years so she could pay for my textbooks. She missed her own sister's funeral because she was covering an extra shift to help pay for my bar exam prep course. The silence had taken on a different quality now. She is the finest person I have ever known, and you called her a mistake in address. I looked directly at Isabel. And you laughed. Isabel's smile had vanished. Nathan, everyone was just joking around. You're being sensitive. No. The word ripped out of me, harder than I intended. I'm not being sensitive, Isabel. I'm being clear. This marriage is over. The gasps could have powered a small wind farm. What? Isabel's composure cracked. You can't be serious. We just got married 3 hours ago. I am entirely serious. I want an annulment. I turned to address the room. I apologize to everyone who traveled here tonight. The bar will remain open for another 2 hours and the catering is paid for through 11. Please enjoy the rest of the evening. I handed the microphone to a stunned server and walked to table 12. My mother was crying properly now. She kept trying to tell me I didn't have to do this, that she was fine, that she didn't want to ruin my life. You didn't ruin anything, I told her. They did. And I should have seen it long before now. Michael helped me guide her toward the exit. Behind us, chaos erupted. Victoria was shrieking about deposit money. Richard was demanding someone talk some sense into that boy. Chloe kept saying it was just a joke and people needed to lighten up. And Isabel stood frozen in her cathedral train, watching her perfect wedding collapse around her. Daniel caught up with us in the lobby, slightly out of breath. Nathan, what do you need? Get my mother home safe. I have some things to handle here. He nodded without question, taking my mother's arm with the gentle firmness of someone used to crisis management. His wife worked in emergency medicine, he'd learned composure by osmosis. Nathan, please, my mother protested. Don't do anything rash. Maybe you can still fix this. There's nothing to fix, Mom. This is who they are. Who she is. I just refuse to see it. I kissed her forehead. Go with Daniel. I'll call you in a few hours. I watched them leave through the hotel service entrance, avoiding the front doors where guests had already begun spilling out in confusion. Then I turned back toward the ballroom. Isabel intercepted me halfway there. Her makeup had started to run, and her carefully styled hair was coming loose from its architectural arrangement of pins. Nathan, we need to talk. Privately. There's nothing to discuss. You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing both of us. Her voice dropped to an urgent whisper. Do you have any idea what you've done? The Hendersons, the Costanos, the Garrett family, everyone important was here tonight. Everyone saw you throw a tantrum over a harmless joke. A harmless joke? I repeated the words slowly, tasting their absurdity. Your sister called my mother a mistake. Your entire family laughed. You laughed. It was just teasing. God, Nathan, welcome to how normal families operate. Not everything has to be so precious and sensitive. If that's normal, I want no part of it. Her expression shifted from pleading to calculating. Fine, walk away. But know this, you'll never work in this city. My father has relationships at every major firm. He can make one phone call and your career is over before it starts. Then he should start dialing. I left her standing in the corridor, her designer gown pooling on the marble floor, her threats echoing off walls that had witnessed a century of high society gatherings. None of them, I suspected, had ever witnessed anything quite like this. The hotel manager approached me as I collected my things from the groom's suite. She was a composed woman in her 50s, clearly accustomed to managing wealthy clients through various crises. Mr. Lawson, I understand this evening has taken an unexpected turn. Is there anything the hotel can do to assist? Just let the caterers know they can start winding down, and please extend the bar service, as I mentioned. These people flew in from all over the country. The least I can do is not send them home sober. She smiled slightly. That's very considerate given the circumstances. It's not their fault they witnessed a family's true colors. My own room was on a different floor, booked as a backup in case I needed space before the ceremony. I sat on the bed for a long time, still wearing my tuxedo, staring at the wall while the implications of what I had done settled around me like dust after an explosion. I had just publicly humiliated one of the most connected families in the state. I had called off a wedding 3 hours after it concluded. I had made an enemy of people who viewed revenge as a lifestyle rather than a momentary impulse. And I felt, for the first time in months, absolutely certain I had done the right thing. We drove to my mother's house in silence. She kept apologizing until I finally pulled over on a quiet street and turned to face her. "Mom, listen to me. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. What they did was cruel and deliberate, and I should have protected you from it. I should have ended this relationship the first time I heard Isabel speak about you dismissively. That's on me, not you." She touched my face with trembling fingers. "I just wanted you to be happy. I could never be happy with someone who would treat you that way. That's not the kind of man Dad raised." We just held each other in the car, for what felt like an eternity, as the sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of logistics and confrontation. My attorney, Adam Stone, had been a law school classmate who specialized in family law. He helped me file for annulment on the grounds of fraud, arguing that Isabel had misrepresented fundamental aspects of her character during our relationship. The Montgomerys responded with threats. Richard called me directly, his voice dripping with disdain. "You have no idea what you've done, Nathan. Do you understand the embarrassment you've caused this family? The Harringtons were there. The Costanos. People talk in our circles. Then give them something to talk about. We will bury you. Your little legal career will be over before it starts. I have connections in every major firm in the city. Is that all?" He sputtered for a moment before hanging up. What Richard didn't know, however, was that I'd spent the last 2 years working under Sarah Brooks, one of the most respected litigators in the state, a woman with absolutely no patience for bullying. When I told her what happened, she made 3 phone calls. By the end of the week, I had a position secured at a firm Richard couldn't touch, and 2 other partners had quietly mentioned they would be happy to have me should anything change. But the real revelation came from an unexpected source. Michael called me on the 4th day. "You need to see something. Can you come over tonight?" His apartment was cluttered with the comfortable chaos of someone who worked from home as a software developer. He handed me a beer and sat down across from his computer. "Remember how I told you I work with financial software? Fraud detection, algorithms, that kind of thing?" I nodded. After what happened, I got curious. Started digging into the Montgomery business holdings. Just surface-level stuff at first. Public records, corporate filings. But then I noticed some patterns. He pulled up a series of documents on a screen. Shell companies nested inside shell companies, real estate transactions that didn't add up, discrepancies between reported income and visible assets. I think they're hiding money. A lot of it. And I think some of these properties they've been developing, the ones they fast-track through zoning, there are kickbacks going to city officials. My legal training kicked in immediately. "Michael, if this is accurate, this is serious. Securities fraud, bribery, potentially RICO implications." "I know. That's why I called you." We spent the next 2 weeks carefully documenting everything Michael had found. I consulted with Adam on the legal implications and brought in a former colleague who now worked for the FBI's white-collar crime division. She reviewed the evidence, asked a lot of questions, and eventually said the 6 words that would change everything: "This is enough to open investigation." The federal inquiry began quietly, but it didn't stay quiet for long. In early July, agents arrived at the Montgomery estate with warrants. The charges came in waves over the following months. Wire fraud, tax evasion, bribery of public officials, conspiracy. Richard was indicted first, then Victoria for her role in hiding assets through her various charitable organizations. Chloe's husband, who handled their investment portfolio, found himself facing charges of securities manipulation. I remember where I was when I saw the news break. My office at the firm had a small television mounted in the corner, usually tuned to financial news for background noise during long document reviews. Richard's face appeared on screen, his expression a mixture of confusion and indignation as federal agents escorted him from the estate he had spent decades building. The headline scrolled beneath, "Real Estate Mogul Arrested in Sweeping Corruption Probe." Sarah Brooks stopped by my office doorway, coffee in hand. "Someone you know?" "My almost father-in-law." She raised an eyebrow. "The wedding incident?" "I heard about that through the grapevine." "Quite the exit strategy." "It wasn't a strategy. It was the only choice I could make and still respect myself." She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "That's why I promoted you twice. This office has enough people who calculate every move for maximum advantage. We need more who act from conviction." She gestured toward the television. "I assume you had nothing to do with this." I reported what I found through proper channels. "The investigation is entirely federal." "Good. Keep it that way. Clean hands are your best protection if anyone tries to claim retaliation." The coverage intensified over the following weeks. Journalists dug into the Montgomery family history, uncovering decades of questionable dealings that had been glossed over by social connections and charitable donations. Former employees came forward with stories of intimidation and illegal employment practices. Business partners admitted to arrangements that had always made them uncomfortable but seemed too risky to refuse. Victoria's charities, it turned out, had been elaborate money laundering operations. The foundation dedicated to empowering underprivileged youth had empowered precisely zero underprivileged youth while transferring millions to offshore accounts. The Environmental Preservation Fund had preserved nothing except the Montgomerys' ability to dodge tax obligations. The media coverage was extensive. The fall of a prominent real estate family, complete with federal corruption charges and a dramatic wedding cancellation, proved irresistible to journalists. Stories appeared in the Times, the Journal, local news stations running segments with serious-faced anchors explaining complex financial crimes. One reporter managed to track me down, hoping for a comment on my role in exposing the Montgomery empire. I declined the interview, but couldn't resist watching the segment when it aired. They had unearthed footage from the wedding itself, likely sold by someone on the catering staff. The clip showed Chloe delivering her toast, my mother's stricken face, my march to the microphone. The reporter called it a moment of moral clarity that would eventually topple a criminal dynasty. I wasn't sure about that framing. My moment of moral clarity had been about protecting my mother from cruelty. The criminal dynasty toppled because of choices the Montgomerys had made long before I entered their orbit. But narratives require heroes, and I seemed to fit the available role. Isabel called me once, shortly after the first indictments. Her voice was stripped of its usual polished confidence. "Did you do this? Did you turn them in? Your family broke the law. The consequences are their own. We could have had everything, Nathan. You could have been part of all of this. I never wanted any of it. I wanted a partner who would respect the people I love. You couldn't even manage that much." She hung up without another word. The annulment was granted in August. The judge noted that the marriage had never been consummated, which was true given that I had left the reception immediately. Richard's legal team tried to argue that my involvement in the investigation represented some kind of conspiracy, but their claims went nowhere. My conscience was clear. My mother recovered slowly from the humiliation of that night. For weeks, she kept apologizing, kept blaming herself for causing trouble. It took many conversations, and eventually a few sessions with the counselor I helped her find, before she began to accept that none of what happened was her fault. The hardest part was watching her confidence crumble. A woman who had faced down hostile patients, difficult doctors, and the grinding exhaustion of single parenthood now second-guessed whether she should leave her house. She stopped accepting invitations to her book club, convinced that everyone must have heard about the incident and was judging her. She started wearing only muted colors, as if trying to become invisible. One afternoon, I arrived at her house unannounced and found her sitting at the kitchen table, the blue dress from the wedding spread out before her. "I was thinking about donating it," she said without looking up. "But every time I try to put it in the bag, I can't make myself do it." I sat down across from her. "Why not?" "Because then they win. They called it ugly and cheap and wrong, and if I get rid of it, I'm agreeing with them." Her fingers traced the fabric. "But I can't look at it either. Every time I see it, I hear that woman's voice. That's not a mother. That's a mistake in a dress." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You know what I see when I look at that dress? I see a woman who saved for 4 months because she wanted to look nice at her son's wedding. I see someone who asked for my opinion because my happiness mattered more to her than her own vanity. I see my mother, who has never been a mistake in anything she has ever worn or said or done." She started crying then, the quiet tears of someone who had been holding too much for too long. "I just wanted to fit in," she whispered. "I knew I would never belong in their world, but I thought if I tried hard enough, dressed well enough, stayed quiet enough, they might at least tolerate me, for your sake. You shouldn't have to shrink yourself for anyone's sake, including mine." We sat together until the afternoon light faded to evening. Eventually, she folded the dress and placed it back in her closet. She never wore it again, but she kept it. "A reminder," she said later, "that survival is its own victory." On her birthday in September, I took her to a restaurant she had always wanted to try, but never felt she could afford. She wore a new dress, something she had picked out herself. And for the first time in months, she smiled without sadness underneath. "I'm proud of you," she said over dessert. "Not because of what you did to them, but because you knew who you were in that moment. You knew what mattered. You taught me that. Your father did, too. He was always clear about his values, about what he would and wouldn't accept. I see him in you sometimes." Her eyes grew distant. "He would have stood up at that wedding, too. Probably would have thrown something." We laughed together, and it felt like healing. The trials dragged on through the fall and into winter. Richard received 14 years for his crimes. Victoria got 7, plus substantial fines and forfeiture of assets. The Montgomery estate was eventually sold to cover legal fees and restitution. Chloe and her husband divorced after he turned state's evidence in exchange for reduced charges. I attended Richard's sentencing hearing, sitting in the back row where I could observe without drawing attention. The federal courtroom had none of the grandeur of the spaces the Montgomerys preferred, just functional furniture and fluorescent lighting that flattered no one. Richard's attorney delivered an impassioned plea for leniency, citing his client's contributions to the community, his age, his deteriorating health since the arrest. He painted Richard as a businessman who had made mistakes rather than a criminal who had systematically defrauded investors and corrupted public officials for decades. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for precise rulings, was unmoved. "Mr. Montgomery, you built your empire on a foundation of lies. You bribed officials who were sworn to serve the public interest. You cheated investors who trusted you with their life savings. And throughout these proceedings, you have shown no remorse, only outrage at being caught." She removed her glasses and fixed him with a stare that could have cut diamond. "The sentence imposed by this court reflects not only the magnitude of your crimes, but the arrogance with which you committed them, 14 years. Richard would be nearly 80 when he emerged, assuming he survived that long. His expression as the marshals led him away was one of genuine bewilderment, as if he still couldn't comprehend how his world had collapsed so completely. I didn't feel triumph watching him go. I didn't feel much of anything, honestly. The man who had threatened to destroy my career, who had helped orchestrate my mother's humiliation, who had built his fortune through corruption and maintained it through intimidation, was just a diminished figure in an orange jumpsuit, shuffling toward consequences he had spent his whole life believing he could escape." Victoria's trial produced more drama. She took the stand in her own defense, convinced that her society connections and carefully cultivated image would sway the jury. Instead, she came across as exactly what she was, a privileged woman who believed rules applied only to lesser people. Her testimony included the memorable assertion that her charitable fraud had been more of a creative accounting situation and that she couldn't be expected to understand all those technical regulations. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Chloe escaped criminal charges but found her life unraveling nonetheless. Her husband's cooperation with prosecutors meant she lost access to most of their shared assets, which were subject to forfeiture. Her social standing evaporated overnight. The same friends who had laughed at her wedding toast suddenly couldn't recall her name. Last I heard, she had moved to a rental apartment in a suburb none of her former circle would be caught dead visiting. I followed it all from a comfortable distance, focusing instead on building my career and rebuilding my life. Sarah Brooks promoted me twice in 18 months, praising my moral clarity in ways that felt unearned but welcome. I bought a small house not far from my mother's place, close enough to visit easily, but distant enough to maintain adult boundaries. The house needed work when I purchased it, minor repairs and cosmetic updates that the previous owners had deferred. I found myself spending weekends with paint rollers and power tools, discovering a satisfaction in physical labor that surprised me. My mother would come over sometimes, offering opinions on color choices, and keeping me company while I worked. "Your father was handy like this," she mentioned during one of these visits. "He could fix anything. Plumbing, electrical, didn't matter. He always said there was no problem that couldn't be solved with the right tools and enough patience. I remember he fixed my bicycle when the chain broke. Made it look easy. Everything looked easy when he did it. That was his gift." She was quiet for a moment, watching me sand a windowsill. "You have that too, you know, that steadiness. Even when things are falling apart around you, you find a way to keep moving forward." I thought about the wedding, about standing in that ballroom while 200 people stared and whispered, about walking away from everything I had planned for my future. It hadn't felt steady at the time. It had felt like freefall. "I learned it from watching you," I told her. "All those years you kept us going no matter what. You never fell apart. Not where I could see." She laughed softly. "Oh, I fell apart plenty. Just waited until you were asleep." We worked in companionable silence after that. The late afternoon sun slanting through windows I had cleaned that morning. This, I realized, was what I had actually wanted all along. Not the Montgomery estate or the society connections or the validation of marrying into old money. Just ordinary moments with people who mattered. Building something real with my own hands. One evening in late December, almost exactly a year and a half after the wedding, I was cleaning out a closet when I found my grandmother's ring. Isabel had returned it through her attorney, and I had shoved it in a drawer without looking at it. I held it up to the light, turning it slowly. The diamond caught the lamp glow and scattered it into tiny rainbows across the wall. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, "Dinner Sunday. I'm making your father's pot roast." I typed back immediately, "I'll bring the wine." Some things matter more than money, more than status, more than the approval of people who measure worth in dollars and pedigree. My grandmother understood that when she accepted this modest ring from a man who had nothing but his love and his determination. My father understood it when he chose my mother, a woman with no connections and no family money. My mother understood it every time she chose my well-being over her own comfort. I understood it standing in a ballroom full of 204 people, watching the woman I had married laugh at the best person I knew. The Montgomerys never understood any of it. That was their tragedy, not mine. I placed the ring back in its box and set it on my dresser. Someday, maybe I'd give it to someone who deserved it. Someone who would see its history not as a mark of inadequacy, but as a legacy. Someone who would look at my mother and see what I saw, a woman who gave everything for her son, asking nothing in return except to be present in his happiness. Until then, I had everything I needed. The Sunday pot roast was excellent. The wine was better. And my mother's smile, free finally from the shadow of that terrible night, was the best thing of all. Some stories end with dramatic confrontations or courtroom victories. Mine ended with a family dinner. Just the two of us, talking about nothing important, while the winter dark pressed against the windows in a house filled with warmth. That was the real revenge, really. Not the indictments or the prison sentences or the fall of a family that had mocked us. The revenge was this ordinary happiness, hard-earned through integrity, shared with the person who mattered most. The Montgomerys would never truly grasp what they lost by treating my mother that way. They'd never understand that their cruelty cost them not just a son-in-law, but any claim to moral standing. They would serve their sentences and emerge diminished, their reputation destroyed, their fortune scattered, their legacy one of shame rather than pride. My mother and I would continue to have Sunday dinners. We would talk about her garden and my cases and whether the neighbor's new dog was actually that loud or if we were just getting old. We would mark anniversaries and holidays and ordinary days that didn't require marking at all. We would live well, which is, in the end, the only revenge that matters. Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought you wanted, everything you planned, shattered in an instant, only to reveal what truly mattered?